Hi there and welcome back. It's Frank here. When you use Ubuntu Linux or in an office environment or any other environment, you might occasionally walk away from the computer, perhaps to grab a coffee or perhaps to do something else. Maybe printing something or any other activity. So in that time, a malicious actor could use your computer and do funky things. So what can you do to prevent that? Well, obviously on the hardware level you cannot do so much because they have physical access to the hardware. But on the software level, you don't want to make it too easy that once you step away from the computer, somebody has immediate access to your computer. So what can you do? Set up a screen lock. So once you walk away from the computer will automatically be locked. So you can do that by doing a right click on your desktop, click on Display Settings, then going to Privacy and go to Screen. And in there you can turn on the automatic screen lock. Then will lock your computer, so you'll need a password to get into the computer and to use it again. So as a quick security tip is to turn it on, because it might be that you trust all of the colleagues or all of the people in the building, but maybe there is a malicious actor in there that, okay, if you leave it unlocked, they then have access to your entire computer, to your email, to basically everything on your computer. So it's a good habit to lock it, because not everyone can be trusted. And it's really simple to turn it on, basically just flipping this switch and that's it. So then once you wait, it will lock the screen automatically. Now you might want to set up the time, how long. And so if we go to screen, you can set what time should be, what period of activity. So should it be 5 minutes, should it be 1 minute, should it be 15 minutes? It depends on your use case. But it's a good habit to lock your screen if you go away from your computer. Hi there and welcome back. It's Frank here. When you use Ubuntu Linux or in an office environment or any other environment, you might occasionally walk away from the computer, perhaps to grab a coffee or perhaps to do something else. Maybe printing something or any other activity. So in that time, a malicious actor could use your computer and do funky things. So what can you do to prevent that? Well, obviously on the hardware level you cannot do so much because they have physical access to the hardware. But on the software level, you don't want to make it too easy that once you step away from the computer, somebody has immediate access to your computer. So what can you do? Set up a screen lock. So once you walk away from the computer will automatically be locked. So you can do that by doing a right click on your desktop, click on Display Settings, then going to Privacy and go to Screen. And in there you can turn on the automatic screen lock. Then will lock your computer, so you'll need a password to get into the computer and to use it again. So as a quick security tip is to turn it on, because it might be that you trust all of the colleagues or all of the people in the building, but maybe there is a malicious actor in there that, okay, if you leave it unlocked, they then have access to your entire computer, to your email, to basically everything on your computer. So it's a good habit to lock it, because not everyone can be trusted. And it's really simple to turn it on, basically just flipping this switch and that's it. So then once you wait, it will lock the screen automatically. Now you might want to set up the time, how long. And so if we go to screen, you can set what time should be, what period of activity. So should it be 5 minutes, should it be 1 minute, should it be 15 minutes? It depends on your use case. But it's a good habit to lock your screen if you go away from your computer. Hi there and welcome back. You can configure a firewall on a Linux system. So how do you do that? First, we open a terminal. You can go to the activities panel and search for terminal. From here, we can set up a firewall. So we first need to install it. The firewall is called UFW, Uncomplicated Firewall, UFW. You can install it with this command. You'll see I have already installed it. And now you can configure it, but in order to configure it, we're just going to use the terminal. So we don't use any graphical interface to configure the firewall. Simply use the terminal to configure the firewall. So what commands do we need? So by default, we can deny outgoing and incoming network traffic using the commands sudo ufw deny outgoing and sudo ufw default deny incoming. So that's good. Those commands are just gonna deny network traffic. make sure the spelling is right. So you should be an F. Okay, so by default, any network traffic going out of the computer is blocked, and anything incoming is blocked as well. And next, you probably want to unblock some things. Otherwise, basically, it's the same as not having internet because everything is blocked. We can check the status with sudo ufw status verbose. And see, it's disabled, so we need to enable the firewall. Now it's enabled, and let's get the status. So you'll see firewall is now active, and it's denying any network traffic to the computer at all. So that's not what we want probably. Probably we want to use the web or something else. So how do you allow the web? So anything on the web allowed, but everything else blocked. You can use ports, which are doors into your computer. They're called ports, and they're indicated by a number. So the web always uses port 80, 443, and 53. So we can allow those. So let's allow outgoing traffic 80, 443. So those are HTTP, HTTPS. And 53 is the domain system. So the names or the URLs you type. So if we do that, we have new rules and we can still use the web. So you'll see by default, any network traffic is denied when incoming or outgoing, but it is allowing some network traffic, which is surfing the web. Now, if you want to allow surfing the web, you would type those commands. It really depends on your use case. Maybe you don't want to allow that at all. Maybe you only want to allow, for example, access on port 22 or remote desktop on another port. Or maybe you only want to allow some file sharing, so which you probably use another port number. And so this is how you would configure a firewall using the UFW firewall. Now you can disable a firewall if you want using the disable command. So disable disables the firewall, and enable enables it. You can see the status with this command. So if something doesn't work, it might be that the firewall is blocking it. So you want to be sure that the ports you allow, that the programs that you use actually use the ports you allow. So what you can do also is to reset the rules. Maybe you made some mistake. Again, this command will reset all the firewall rules. If you press yes, all firewall rules will be deleted. Now if we check the status, you'll see it's inactive. If we enable it and check the status, you'll see it's still denying incoming and outgoing traffic, but there are no rules about what is allowed. So this is how you can configure a firewall on your own Ubuntu computer. On any Linux system, you can install software. Typically, you would use the software for it on Ubuntu. So you have a sort of package manager, graphical store, where you can install apps. So this is one way to install software, and it's actually the most secure way to install software, using this graphical interface or the terminal equivalent of it. If I open a terminal, Ctrl-Alt-T will open a terminal. We can use sudo apt-get install with some package main. So for example, maybe you want to install Vim, and you would type yes, and it then installs Vim into your computer, as long as your firewall is not blocking it. In this case, the firewall is blocking everything. Another way to install would be using snap, so sudo snap install. It's a specific Ubuntu system, snap packages, and you can install, for example, Vim or whatever is available. So that's a secure way to install packages. There's also an insecure way to install software, which is going to the web and then downloading, for example, snap files or app files, and then manually installing those on your computer. Because those files can be modified by anyone, which could be malicious, and sometimes they are. So it's more likely to encounter malicious software if you go to the web and install random software from the web, rather than using the official way. So either using the App Store or using snap install or apt install. The chance to get malware is a lot smaller using the official sources, rather than downloading them from the web, like downloading .deb file or .snap file or tar.gz or which other formats. You can download apps from the web, but it's less secure to do that. It's better to use the official App Store or using the package manager on your Linux system. Imagine your computer is like a superhero and it has some sidekicks that helps with different tasks. But not all these sidekicks are needed all the time. So we can quickly check in the terminal all these sidekicks called services. So using quite a long command, so this is how we can see all our computer system's sidekicks, all our services. You see there's quite a lot of them. We can go through them by pressing the spacebar. See, a lot of different services are running on the computer. And so these sidekicks be very useful, for example, if you want to print or some other kind of network service. But if you can also turn them off, and it will make your computer sometimes safer. So, for example, Bluetooth. Maybe you don't use Bluetooth. It's cool for wireless thing or speakers, perhaps, depending on whether you like Bluetooth or not. It can also be a security risk. So what you can do is turn Bluetooth off. So to simply stop it, we can type the command sudo systemctl stop Bluetooth. That would stop it. However, if we were to restart the computer, it will be turned on again because it's only stopped. So to make it disabled all the time, you can simply type disable. And then when you restart the computer, it's not running. So the difference is this is a temporary stop and this is a permanent stop. So you'll see now I made it disabled permanently. Now Bluetooth is one of the things you can disable. So you might hate printers as much as me. For work, when you want to print. When you're not printing, running a printer service might be a security risk. So maybe you only want to allow that when you're actually going to print. So this command will stop the printer service. If you want to never gonna use printers, you can disable it. Also all kind of network services. For example, maybe you're running a remote desktop, you can disable that or stop that. Pino server, remote desktop server, so that someone can remotely connect and then control the computer. It might be useful, but you might want to disable that. Kind of file sharing. So you'll see I don't have these services installed. It's saying not loaded, but this will be the command if you're running this file server, FTP server. You might share files on the network. You can disable that as well. So this is how you would disable it, stopping SMTP. Maybe you're running a web server, Apache 2 or Nginx, so you would type stop Apache 2 or stop Nginx. That would stop running the web server. So all of these services can be security risks, especially if they are connected to the network. Now, it might also be that you have some database running, so something like MySQL or MariaDB. So you can disable any services you want. You can check them with the earlier command, so which services are running really depends on what you installed before. You can go through this list and check, do you really need that? For example, here we are running the printer service. We might not need that. For example, if we don't have a printer, we might disable that. Or any of the other services that you see here. Now you want to be careful. You don't want to disable services that you are actually using. For example, we are using a network service. We're using the internet, but there's all kind of things. And other kind of services that are running. And so whether those are needed, it really depends on your use of the system, but it's useful to check and then disable the ones that you're not going to use, because it reduces the attack surface. It reduces or it becomes harder to hack your computer if you disable all those services. Hi there and welcome back. Now on Linux there's many different things you can configure and you can make more secure. But how do you know where to start? One of the ways is to use an audit, so to run a script that automatically checks your entire system for possible things to improve. One of such scripts is called Linux. You can get it from github.com, the program.linux from CISOFI. Install it. You simply copy and paste two commands. So first we'll need to have git. You'll see the git command here. So make sure to install git. See, we need to install git first. Now once git is installed, we can run those commands. So we're gonna download the code. with this command. That will download the Linux program from the github.com website. We enter the Linux directory, and now we can do an audit, so we can check the entire system for any bad configuration, bad security configuration automatically. We can do that by doing Linux audit system. So this program will do all that checking automatically for you. You'll see if I press enter, it starts evaluating the system. So it starts checking the entire system, tells you what system you're running, do you need to update. Any other things will be listed here so that you can improve that. And you see all kind of tells you about the running services. So in this case, 31 services, and tells you also some status. And it goes through the entire system and checks about possible misconfigurations or things you can improve for your Linux system. So quite a useful script. It's completely free, so you can just download it and run it on your system to see of any possible bad configuration that you can improve. For example, it checks if it's running firewall, checks installed services, maybe if the clock is set correctly, and many other things on your Linux system, and then gives an overall rating of the security of your system. So depending on the score, you might want to improve a lot of things or not. So if you go through this list, you'll see, for example, there are banners shown, which might not be the best idea because a hacker can then see, okay, he's running this computer system. You'll see there's some services, checked if they are installed. Something about logging here. There's any network exposed services running. So you'll see, for example, if it would be running a web server, a SSH server, a database, and so on. It's scanning everything. It will also scan for malware. So it didn't find any malware components here. Check some file permissions. And a lot of different things will be checked here. And you'll see you get an overall security score. Once it's completed, it tells you the number of tests you did. Also, for example, on this computer, it tells you, okay, there's no malware scanner installed. It shows as an X. Something that you can then improve. Now, in this case, there's a firewall running. We did it in the other video. And so it's a quick way to check the overall system of your security. And you get some idea. So in this case, 65 score. So it could be improved, the security of this system. A good practice is to remove any software that you're not using anymore. You can install all kind of free software. Sometimes that software can introduce security risks to your system. In general, less is more. The less software you have, the less likely your computer is hacked. And so what do you want to do to remove any software that you're not using anymore? So we can open a terminal and type sudo apt auto remove. And you want to remove any software that is not being used anymore. Alternatively, you can check what software is installed. Now, software can be installed in two ways in Ubuntu, either using apt, so apt packages or snap packages. Quick check for apt packages, you can do dpkg --list. Will show you a lot of installed applications on your computer. So the command is dpkg --list. You can browse through the list with spacebar, and you can see all the software you have installed onto your computer. Another software is snap. So snap packages is common in Ubuntu as well. If you didn't disable it, you type snap list, and it will also list software installed in your computer. Snap packages, so you'll see, for example, things like Firefox, Snap Store, and whatever you install using the store. So two ways to list the packages. If you want to remove a package that is apt package, you can type sudo apt-get remove and then the package name. And you can do the same thing for snap. So you can do sudo snap remove and then the name of the package to remove it. So it's a good practice to remove any software you don't use. For one, because you get more disk space, so free disk space, rather for security reasons. Hello and welcome back. Now you might use the web quite a lot, whether it's through Firefox, through Chrome, or any other web browser. Now, Web browsers by default, they allow advertisements, and you might think, what's wrong with that? Well, sometimes those advertisements are malware, so criminals use those systems to spread malware to different computers. They might something that looks like legitimate advertisements, but it's actually spreading malware. So one good way to prevent that getting onto your computer is just blocking advertisements completely. Also with an extension called uBlock Origin. We go to the extensions or through Google search. You can install an extension called uBlock Origin. And if you enable it, advertisements will no longer be shown. But also malware that spreads to your true advertising can no longer spread in that way. So it's a nice security tip. It reduces the possibility of getting malware onto your computer. If you use mobile phones or smartphones like Android or iPhone, you might be familiar with the concept of permissions, so what applications can do. On Ubuntu, you can list permissions of a snap package using the command snap connections and then the program name, for example, Firefox. And that will tell you all the permissions of Firefox. So you'll see it quite a lot. They can interact with the graphical interface, which is quite obvious, but also they can access personal files, can use your home directory, use different settings, and you can see all the different permissions. For example, use the camera or audio. And you can check that for any program, any snap program. So if you type snap list, you can see programs installed. And if we type snap connections with any snap, you can check what permissions are allowed for that snap. However, right now the ability to disable or enable permissions for any application is quite limited, so it's mostly listing what applications can do. Now, most likely you'll trust these snaps. They are part of the default system, but if you install snaps from other sources, it might be a good idea to check what are these snaps actually doing or what permissions do they have on your system. Before we do our backup party, let's talk the real talk about our disks. So disks can be unpredictable. You can buy disks and the default disk in your computer or USB pulse. One day they work and the next day they're broken. So it's a good idea to make backups. And not just for that reason, but also for lifespans. So any hardware you have has a certain lifespan. Now let's talk about these lifespans. So classic hard disks might get you 5 or 10 years of storage. After that, the disk completely fails. More modern disks, SSD disks, might last a little bit longer, 10 to 15 years. And the same thing for USB flash drives. You can put your files in there. Might be good for 5 or 10 years, and they might break even sooner. With CD, compact disc or CDs, it can be even shorter. So it's not just hacking that could be a security risk, but also the device failing itself could lose all your files. So it's a good idea to get backups. So how do you create backups on a Linux system? One way is simply using a file manager. Let's say you have some files, you can select them, right click and compress, and then create a zip file or any other type of archive. Now for security, you might want to use a password protected zip file so that you can upload it somewhere and that anyone who has access to your backup might not be able to access your files because it's password protected. Of course, picking a secure password. So one way is simply making a zip file. Or let's call it backup and click create. And then you have a backup file, and if you were to copy it to a new computer, you could simply right click and extract, and you would have your backup files again. You can do the same thing from the terminal. You don't have to do that with the graphical interface. So you can use zip, for example, to create a zip file. So we can do, for example, zip backup.zip with the files we want to add next. So for example, the password file, and we have some other file here, test.html. And you'll see that created the zip file with those files in it. So that's how you can create a zip file from the command line. So zip is just a collection of files. Now you're not limited to files. You can also add folders to the zip file. So let's say we delete this one, and let's say we add the pictures folder. Do it like picture slash, and then the picture slash folder is also added to the zip file. If I click on it, So that's one way you could create a backup simply using zip files or the other archives. There are different archive possibilities, and in the graphical interface you can see it quite clearly. If you click compress, see different formats. You can save it as a tar.gz, 7-zip, or simply zip. Work on both the graphical interface or the command line interface. It might have a small size difference, but it's the same idea. Now this is just one way to backup, a little bit manual. If you want a more sophisticated backup, you can tool in your activities called backup. So if you go to that option, you can click create a new my first backup, and then add whichever directories you want to backup. And if you go forward, you have an option to upload it to the cloud, and you have a cloud backup. Now for backups, it's a general good idea to use the 3-2-1 strategies. So at least make 3 backups, because any backup can fail. For example, you might not have internet access when you need it. If you have a cloud backup, it might be that breaks, your USB disk breaks, or something else. So it's a good idea to have 3 backups, a cloud backup or copy as well, and 2 different physical backups in different locations. Way, if one of those backups doesn't work anymore, for example the disk fails, then you can use the copy, the other backup. So good idea to keep 3 backups, and ensure that you don't lose your files. And don't just trust the cloud, because stuff happens with the cloud too. Maybe in an emergency you cannot access the internet, maybe the modem doesn't work, maybe the company itself gets hacked and you can no longer access the files, or maybe some technical problems that you can't access your accounts. It's good to have different backups, because when you need it, there's a problem that happens. For example, you lose your files. It might be that one or the other backup solution didn't work. So it's good to do it 3 times. And that way you're sure that you can always access your files. So that strategy is called the 3-2-1 strategy. It's a backup strategy that is more reliable than just simply having a copy on one disk or one cloud drive or one other stick or whatever. It's good to have 3 different backups in case that one or the other fails. So in that way you have possibility to even have 2 alternatives fail and still have the option to access your files. Hi, it's Frank here. I'm going to show you an old version of Ubuntu 14.04, and show you why you should update. So let's log in as guest user. See, guest user in this case doesn't need any password, and it gives a default shell in the system. Now that in itself is not bad. You might want guest users that are able to use the computer, but there is a security vulnerability here. So as a guest user, you can access files of other users. So if you go to the files here, see in the default we are in /home/guest. Now let me enlarge the screen here. Okay, so the screen is larger now, and let's say we go to the home directory. Then we can browse around in other people's directories. So for example, we can enter the Ubuntu directory, and we can then access files in the documents directory or in the desktop directory and copy all those files, upload them to the internet or whatever it is we want to do. So as an other user, for example the guest user, we don't need any passwords to access the files of other users. So that's a bug that has been fixed in newer versions of Ubuntu. But in older versions of Ubuntu, like in this case Ubuntu 14.04, very old version of Ubuntu, you could simply access the files of other users. So they had a password to log in, but basically it was pointless, because you could simply copy all the files. You could copy the entire home Ubuntu directory. If you had a guest user account on the computer, you could just access anything you want. And the guest user was often enabled by default, so a big security bug. And it's also why you want to keep your system up to date, because older versions of Ubuntu, they have that security bug or other security bugs, and you want to make sure that you don't have a problem with those security bugs. And the only way that you can prevent that, like a security bug like this, is simply by updating your system.